Welcome back. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. The headlines. Inside Gaza, Israel's military takes Sky News into the region. The first time media has been allowed in to see the IDF's operation on the ground. Israel's military says it will allow a 4-hour window for civilians in Gaza to evacuate and move south from 10 a.m. local time today. 29 arrests are made during pro-Palestine marches in London as 4 officers are left injured by fireworks. Flights at Hamburg Airport remain suspended indefinitely as German police deal with what they say is a hostage situation after an armed man drove through a security gate with a child. And more flood warnings for southern England as the country deals with the fallout from Storm Ciarán. Let's take you through today's papers now with assistant comment editor at The Telegraph, it's Francis Darnley, and broadcaster and writer Gemma Forte. Thank you both so much for joining us. We were saying just there, weren't we, that it is quite slim pickings in the papers, and rightly so, with what's going on. And we'll start, Francis, with the Sunday Times, because we have this report from our Defence and Security Editor, Deborah Haynes, inside Gaza for the first time, talking about these tunnels. And here we are, finding out a bit more about how Hamas operate.
Yes, well, very brave reporting from the Sunday Times, where we'll start. If we look at what the strategy of Israel is, it's clear that time is of the essence for them for many different reasons. I think first and foremost that the geopolitical pressure is beginning to shift, and America and other countries are obviously ramping up calls for them to be very cautious about the way in which they operate, and of course the demands from Arab leaders for an immediate ceasefire. And what the Sunday Times is doing is on the ground and looking at the nature of the operations there. Of course, the Hamas have essentially taken Gaza and have built, I think by some estimates, 300 kilometres worth of tunnels underneath.
Extraordinary.
It's extraordinary. And I think many people thought that Israel would be obliged to go into those tunnels, but instead they've decided that clearly, given time and given the dangers involved in that, I was talking to one military official recently, said it's extremely dangerous. So it's the worst kind of operation that you can imagine, is entering tunnels controlled by the enemy. And so they've decided to blow them up instead, and this is a report that covers that. But just one more final thing on this. I think it's very interesting in the geopolitical context, as I mentioned. At the end of the day, when many people were wondering whether Arab states would back Hamas, in a sense, whether we would see other terrorist groups in the region like Hezbollah come in behind them, and that has not happened in the last month since the attacks. And I think that many people within Hamas will be thinking that they are essentially on their own now. And so it's important, I think, to contextualize this in what is actually going on in the region, what the motivations behind Hamas, the attacks that they carried out was. And I think one of the primary objectives was to try and stop the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia, other Middle Eastern countries, and Israel in the West. That seems to be that the diplomatic operations taking place behind closed doors have been successful in ensuring that those divisions were not allowed to take place. And so Hamas has actually failed in its fundamental aim, I think.
And how much that will be down to, Gemma, Antony Blinken and his de-escalation in that region. He's gone on this trip across the Middle East, trying to de-escalate what Hamas has started.
Yeah, and you can see his language is changing. It's becoming a little softer, talking about the children and relating it back to his own children, the children in Palestine. But I mean, my thoughts immediately when you talk about, the tunnels being blown up is the hostages are in the tunnels. It must
and
be
that's the whole
so
point of
terrifying
this ceasefire not being put into place until those hostages are released.
Well, Israel's calling for them to be released and would say that they would be willing to, of course, cease in these operations if they were. I think that given the nature of the fighting, and as I mentioned, the fact that time for them, they know, is not on their side, that they are having to make decisions which are very difficult moral ones, but ultimately in geopolitics one has to operate in these ways. And I should say that these would still be standing by international law as it's currently understood. But of course, there'll be many people who will say, you know, who are you blowing up and what are you blowing up?
And there's been many hostages taken from Gaza as well, who are currently being held in Israel. Many of them are children as well. The whole situation is just horrifying and so bewildering.
And as the world watches this play out, people in this country, across many British cities, across the world are marching, and these protests are taking place.
Yes.
Emma, the Observer revealing this plan to brand anyone who they deem suspicious to be UK extremists.
I mean, this is horrifying. This is a paper that Gove is drawing up. And some of it has been leaked. So to be very clear, in 2011, the definition of an extremist was defined as thus. So active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect of tolerance and different faiths and beliefs. I think we can all get our heads around that. We can all understand that. That's very clear. Gove, in this paper, wants to change that definition of an extremist to anyone who undermines the country's institutions and its values. Well, sorry, that means half the cabinet, surely, the ones that were partying during lockdown. Or Suella Braverman herself for saying, take tents away from homeless people, or branding thousands and thousands and thousands of people, brushing them all with saying that they're on hate marches. In my view, that's extremist. And, you know, this government that say they're on the side of freedom of speech, this feels horribly ambiguous. Does it mean any dissent? Does it mean shutting down debate? Does it mean not having opposing views? All of those things, to me, are very sort of British. So I think there's going to be a lot of people opposing this, and we'll see what happens.
I think lots of concerns about, as you say, a crackdown on freedom of speech will be a big concern within Whitehall. And then here we have the Sunday Telegraph, Francis, and this is quite a worrying story. The Met Police advisor leading that chant from river to sea.
Well, yes, I mean, this story is, I think, a concerning one to many, and we've obviously now for several weeks have been these debates about what the from the river to the sea chant means.
And the context in which it's used.
Well, that's it. Context is key here, and I think that that's been missed. I mean, at the end of the day, from the perspective of many people, given the hideous attacks that were carried out against Israel, it's very, very insensitive or worse to be singing this chant in any context, let alone now, but particularly now. And I think it is important to clarify exactly what it means, which is, in essence, from one side of that area to the other, from the river to the sea, and the wiping out of Israel from the map is essentially what it is calling for. And so for many people, that is a genocidal chant, as simple as that. Now, other people would say that it's just a traditional thing to sing at these kind of protests, but I think when you actually look at the reality of what it is calling for, I think it's very concerning when you hear that somebody who is advising the police is chanting and encouraging that kind of, what we need really is cool heads here. And I don't think that we are seeing that from many, many key figures involved in all of this.
What we are seeing is tens of thousands of people, the vast majority, peaceful protesting. And there are pockets, we know, that will be from that extremist wing. And it's getting a grip on that by the police, by the government. And it's the messaging, isn't it, from the government to the police that seems to be not on point at the moment, I'd say, Gemma.
I would agree. I agree, Francis. At the moment, the world is a pretty dark place. You've got a rise of anti-Semitism happening. Jewish people are feeling under threat and frightened and vulnerable. Ditto, Islamophobia, is on the rise as well. We know that. That's just fact. And so in our leadership, we need nuance, we need consideration, we need calmness, we need the understanding that the vast majority of those people on those marches probably are just upset by seeing images of children being blown up. It's about as simplistic as that. And then, of course, within that, you will have pockets of very worrying behaviour that needs to be completely dealt with. But it's not the majority. And I don't think branding it a blanket like that helps anybody.
Hate marches is how the Home Secretary branded them.
Yes,
Francis.
but I wonder whether this question of them being pockets is necessarily true in the sense that who are the people who are leading these marches? And I think there have been many instances, which is why the cause of concern here, where the people who are leading these marches singing from the river to the sea, and who are, would be considered extremely radical on these issues. Now, I don't deny there'll be many well-meaning people who see the instances. Who see the instances of what is happening in Gaza and are appalled and wish to protest about them. But the fact is, these protests were taking place before Israel had even responded to the attacks carried out by Hamas. And I think you can read quite a lot into that, because at the end of the day, this is... why are we here? Why are we talking about this now? It's because not of something that Israel did, it is something that Hamas did. And so I think it's important to remember that. And those who came out immediately calling for Israel to be effectively erased from the map, I think that tells its own story.
Listen, one of the most moving things for me was when Jewish and Palestinian mothers marched together in Jerusalem. Most people just want an end to this, and that may sound simplistic, but they do. We have social media these days. Which
I think often is the problem.
I agree. We are being bombarded with images. I have seen things that I can't get out of my head that are making me unable to sleep at night, that I cannot understand why it is happening in 2023. And many of the people who are moved because they feel helpless, and there are marches all over the world.
Okay. Gemma, Francis, for now, thank you so much. We'll catch up with you again in the next hour.